We're either a fantasy or we're the brunt of the joke. The perception of belly dance, whatever somebody has in mind, what it is to them, they're going to hold on to. Oh, right. This is what we're selling. I thought he understood. I'd be like, I know, Mom. I know. I gave you the name Suhaila, so you would be Suhaila. Thank you for joining me. I am Suhaila Salimpour, and I am sharing stories about my life as a professional belly dancer. I kind of giggled there on that one, like professional belly, because we're talking about fantasy and the fantasy of belly dance. And can we really remove that? Can we remove the two? Like we're either a fantasy or we're the brunt of the joke. And there have been many times where I have had to say no to certain jobs because I knew that I was being hired to be the joke, or I would say no to certain interviews on talk shows or certain guest, like a guest artist on a TV show, because I knew it was to be the joke. Now I'm not trying to say that there's not a place and a role for people feeling good about laughing and playing with and being silly about things. But I think I have a sensitivity to it because it's my culture. And also I have a sensitivity to it because I don't think that there's enough on the other side to counterbalance the joke. Like, I feel like if you look at like all the joke value or the fantasy value, and then where is the substance value over here, I'm not sure that it balances out. And so that's where I feel a little sensitive about the situation. And I think that that's an important conversation. And I used to have this conversation with my mom because I feel that my mom was very much invested in the fantasy as well. And this was part of our conversation always. And she would say to me, you know, I made sure you had a real name. And I was like, what do you mean? As opposed to a fake name? And she'd say, I gave you the name Suhaila, so you would be Suhaila. Like you wouldn't have to take an Arabic name or a fantasy name, because there's this time in the immigrant Arab American story where these nightclubs, these beginning very early on nightclubs, they were contracting dancers, belly dancers from the Middle East. So you had these dancers with their Arabic names. It was Maya, right? It was Karum. It was these Arabic names. And so then when there was a problem and these dancers and these Arabic women were having trouble coming into the country, a lot of the club owners didn't know what to do. And that was a problem because that was a part of the draw into these Arabic nightclubs. And they ended up having to hire Americans, but they didn't really want their clientele to know that they weren't from the Middle East. You know, you couldn't really hire Sally from Orange County and that be the draw to your Arabic nightclub. And so they started giving them Arabic names. And that's when the whole, like, you know, Arabic name thing became in fashion. But also it was in fashion in other dance forms too. I mean, if you were a ballerina in a certain era, you wanted a Russian name. And if you didn't have a Russian name, you took a Russian name. So it wasn't unusual that you were trying to embody and have a name and have a presence and a persona of the culture and the dance form that you were presenting. In my mom's situation, in my mom's case, she was given the name Jamila. Well, actually, her first name was Gamila. She was given Gamila because they couldn't say Giuseppina Carmela Borzi. So they were like, Gamila. And she was like, okay, I like it. It means beautiful. And then later it became Jamila because the ja and the ga in the Arabic language. And so that was how it stuck for her. And so she became Jamila. But it was also, for my mom, she was very much Jamila. And that she really, you know, took on that whole persona. And so when she gave me my name for her, for my mom. She was like, see, you are going to be Suhaila. So for my mom, I think also, and not I think, I know, that when she was dancing, it was probably the happiest time of her life. And that started in childhood, because when she would want to make her father happy, when he was sad, when he had a hard day at work, she would take the bed sheet off and wrap it around her hips, and she would dance for her dad, and it would just light him up, because it was where, that's how they shared their happiness, was for that love too of the culture together. And so for my mom, going to the movies once a month and going into the fantasy of that movie, of that Arabic movie, and then you would buy the album, not the album, the song of the movie, and you'd go home and you would practice the movements. My mom was really very much into the whole fantasy of it too. And part of what she sold to her American students was that fantasy. When I look at my mom's photos, and I remember, because she used to take forever to get ready to go teach class, she was full makeup, beautiful suit dresses. And my mom was gorgeous, and she had this hair and this jewelry, and nobody saw anything like it. My mom would go in full costume to go teach, because she was creating that fantasy for her American students. And I think that that's also what became really important with my mom's students, is that they kind of resonated with my mom with that fantasy. So my mom had that fantasy, and they wanted that fantasy, and they kind of wanted to be her, and she wanted to be that fantasy too. And my mom and I would sometimes argue, because my mom thought that I was going and teaching class and I looked too bland, because I would go in my leotards and tights, and my mom would say, put on some makeup, do something. She wanted me to create that fantasy. And I was confused, because in all the other dance classes and dance forms I was taking, they were teaching in dance clothes and they were sweating. And so why would you wear a lot of makeup? Because then it just drips down your face. And it was kind of hard for me to reconcile with this, no, I'm a dancer and I'm working really hard with the selling of the fantasy. And my mom would tell me to stop making things look so easy, because I was making things look too easy. And she said, make it look harder. And if it's not hard, to pretend it's hard. So, people would think it's hard. And I think that people would always try to separate me and my mom, or my mom's work and my work, and separate our work and separate our artistry and separate our intentions and separate our goals, which we were always really perplexed by. And it may be because those that were trying to separate us wanted to really more buy into fantasy. Even though my mom's perspective, I feel like a lot of it came from the fantasy based, it was never disrespectful to the culture. And it was, actually my mom always wanted to learn about the culture, and she viewed herself as a historian, and she was one of the first researchers and archivers, and she really wanted to learn and know, and she looked at her curiosity as just, and I agree, I do too, as the utmost love and admiration and respect for the culture and the dance. But there was an element of, my mom didn't want to look at anything negative, though. She needed to stay in the fantasy in terms of it all just being so wonderful. It was just so wonderful. It was all wonderful. And that wasn't always necessarily, I believed, the case in some of the cultural aspects of being a belly dancer. And I think that that's where my mom and I would have a separation, because she would say, oh, this man, Suhaila, came up to me after your show, and he just thinks you're so amazing, and he just wants to do anything he can to support your art, because he really appreciates you as an artist, and he just wants to be a patron. And I would roll my eyes, because my mom was supposed to be there to protect me. That was the gag. She was the front. And I'd say, really, Mom? Is that before or after I get to put my clothes back on? And she'd go, oh, you're so vulgar. You need to stop talking. And I'd be like, Mom, really? Do you really think he really appreciates me so much? Well, that's what he said. And I thought, oh, that's so sad for my mom. She really, really hopes that. And I thought that was so cute. And then my mom was always so disappointed over and over when the guy would try to hit on me. I thought he understood. I'd be like, I know, Mom. I know. Mom. Yeah, that's the fantasy. That's the fantasy. I think the fantasy part of it too is that you're just an artist and you're really admired. Yeah. But then there's this other side. You're also culturally, dealing with all these aspects of what your role is as a woman and as a belly dancer in society. And my mom would be like, no, she didn't want to deal with that part. And I think that the other thing is that my grandmother, my mother's mother, had fantasy too. Because my mom used to tell me that my grandmother's fantasy, I'm not even kidding, was to be kidnapped. Yeah, kidnapped. That's everybody's fantasy. Kidnapped by Rudolph Valentino and taken away from all her daily chores. And I was like, what? So, these things I think are generational. And now you get to me in my generation, and oh God, now I look at Isabella and I'm like, yeah, no, it does. As the generations go, it just gets less and less cute wanting to be kidnapped, right? My grandma wants to get kidnapped, and my mom just wants to live in a fantasy world. I'm following a princess's request for costuming, and now Isabella's yeah, no, none of it. This is the biggest I think the biggest difference between me and my mom is that Brooke Shields is on the cover of, was it People magazine at some point, and she's there, and there's it's sand. There's camels, something happening, and she had been invited to maybe a prince's birthday or this big Moroccan party or something, and she's in the Middle East, and Brooke Shields was actually very popular, I think, with Middle Eastern men, and my mom looks at this magazine and this event, and she goes, those are the kind of parties I want you to be dancing at. And I look at my mom, and I knew, I was like, oh, and I said, well, but Mom, those are the kind of events I want to actually be invited to, and not as the help. So I'll never forget. This was really shocking to me. The very first time I came back from performing in the Middle East, I was talking about my experience with my students, and I was being very open, and I was being very open. And I remember talking to this student of my mom's who, made their own big name. And this person's claim to fame was that they taught, Egyptian style. And I was talking about my personal reality of what it was like. And I was being very open about it. And I saw her at an event, and she kind of pulled me over to the side, and she was like, why are you talking about your experience? And I thought she meant don't talk about it because we don't want that many people to go to Egypt. We want this to be exclusive. And I took that to mean because that was part of her marketing, is that she's someone going there and I was like, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you are talking about certain things that are kind of negative about what happens. And I said, yeah, but it's true. And I looked at her like, don't try to tell me that these things haven't happened to you either. And she goes, yeah, I know, but that's not what students want to hear. And that's not going to be good for business. And so we need you. And she looked at me, we need you to sell this really nice little fantasy of that, you work in the Middle East. And I was just in shock because I thought, oh, right. This is what were selling. And I was really disheartened by this because I guess I felt that it was really important to be honest about the situation. And I felt that that would really help dancers be able to feel more grateful of what we can do with the dance form, and maybe value communities of dance that don't put us in danger and situations that might be compromising. I think some of the things that I love about dancing outside of the Middle East is I really think we have a fabulous community. I really think that also, like, my mom and my family, we have really spent a lot of time and energy trying to focus on the community, because it's what really supports and is positive, and it's really, designed, and the infrastructure of the school is there to have this outlet and support, right, for the dancers in the school. And it's not like that, right, outside in the professional dance world. And I was basically told, stop telling people what it's really like, because I'm trying to sell this fantasy of, aren't I fabulous, because I dance in this great fantasy place, and I blend in with the fantasy, and I'm part of the fantasy. And I was like, ugh. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I got to a point where I felt like I had a good 4 months max somewhere. Because you get there and you're new and everything's exciting. And everybody's like, who are you? Then the second month, they're like, oh, wow, you can dance. Third month, all right, you're a threat. Fourth month, you better pick a protector. So you got about 4 months. And if you don't pick a protector, you become the sitting duck. And you have to pick a protector. And that means you probably have to date them, because you need them to invest in you. And the different ways you invest are either other people know that you are now belong to this person, so they don't mess with you. That person also has security for you. That person also pays for your apartment. That person also buys all your costumes. That person also just makes sure that the rest of the community knows, off limits. So then everybody else stops hitting on you too. But you got about 4 months, or you better leave and go to a new contract where it starts all over again. So I had about 4 months until I was like, nope, next. That's the bottom line. That's the reality. And that is, of course, just when I was in the Middle East. Well, the fantasy works two ways as well, because there were times where, you are the fantasy too for them. So you're the belly dancer. And so I remember when I was in the Middle East, I remember one night coming off the stage and all of a sudden kind of like staring at the guards, the policemen, and they were like, you have to come with us. And I was like, can I change? And I didn't know what was going on. And what's really scary is that when I got to Lebanon, I had to forfeit my passport. So you have to give your passport up, and they hold it at the police station. So you give it to the manager, and the manager gives in. So I'm just like, oh God, I don't even have a passport. Like, I can't even make a run for it, right? So, and I'd heard of stories of dancers that like disappeared. So I was like, can I even just change? So my heart is like, and they're like, no. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I had to put my cover up on, and I whisked away to the police station. Now this is after hours. And I brought in, some side door, and it was very like, no one really saw anything. And I'm sitting in this room by myself, scared to death. And I mean, really, this is like, I'm just like, that's it. My life is over. Like, my mother will never see me again. And then all of a sudden, police chief comes in and sits down, and we have tea and we talk, and we have tea and talk and tea, and I'm relaxed, and I'm trying not to bring anything up. And then, it's the sun is coming up, and then I'm let go. Okay, go back here. So-and-so will take you back to your hotel. Okay. And I didn't ask questions. Just get to my hotel and get back in my room. Absolutely fall apart. But the whole thing was, he just wanted to meet me and have a conversation. And he knew I would say no. And so that was how he did it. And so I'm building into that fantasy, and I'm in his fantasy. And it's not like I had a choice on that matter. So also, I think that the perception of belly dance, whatever somebody has in mind, what it is to them, or their objective of what they need to use it for, they're going to hold on to, right? Like they're not going to let it go. They don't want it to, be about a culture or people or have a history. And one of my favorite stories was from a friend of mine who was she was actually cast as a belly dancer in a movie. And in the movie, her role was to be somebody who was auditioning in a talent show. Like she was in a talent show. And so she was a belly dancer in the talent show. So they're filming her scene and she's dancing, and they, cut, and then they feel like, okay, all right, let's try maybe cymbals. And she's like, okay. And so she's dancing now with cymbals. And, it seems like they're enjoying her dancing, but she can tell that something's off. And then they're like, okay, cut. Now maybe music. How about some music? And she's like, okay. And then she puts on music, and then she's dancing, and then they're like, okay, thank you. And then, she's done for the day, and she can tell that something's off, but she also could tell that they, liked her dancing. She was a dancer. And then she was talking to then it was lunch break, and she's hanging out with some of the crew, and they were like, yeah, you were beautiful. And they were like complimenting her dancing. And then they were like, yeah, we're probably not going to be able to use any of your footage at all. And she was so surprised. And it was like, because you're a real dancer. Like you actually were really good. We weren't expecting that. We actually wanted somebody to be horrible. It was supposed to be a joke.